to Alive, Objective Ethics and I. Um, is this your first time on my channel? I think I've just been on yours on previous occasions, so thank you for coming over to mine. And on this occasion, we're going to talk about the nature and purpose of religion and how it pertains to philosophy and politics and all that sort of thing.
It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to speak with you as always, sister. I have actually been on a couple of your panels, at least one for sure that I could think of. I was talking to you and some other lady. It was a long time ago. I can't remember who she was at this point, but I was talking about. Oh gosh, I don't even know if I remember what we were discussing. I think I was talking to her about this.
I don't even remember.
What's that?
The 7 no-hike laws, maybe.
Yeah, it was. It was my 7 pillars of ethics. I think I was talking about with her.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes,
yeah, it's nice to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I suppose the reason why I want to talk about the nature of religion is that I think ideas can become our religion without us quite realizing it. And I think if we don't actually subscribe to a known formal religion, we will substitute in our minds just the stuff we like to believe in. And I think what is sacred to us, if we don't believe in God or have a religion, is, well, our memories, our lived experience. This is what is even called these days, in the form of, how dare you challenge my lived experience? How dare you question it? As if it was something sacred and can never be challenged. I don't know if you've had this question asked at you.
Well,
it's not even a question.
Yeah, no, the thing is that when it comes to religion, there actually are multiple definitions, like with many words. And these, with time, these definitions can change or evolve. And I know a lot of atheists and skeptics, agnostics, whatever you want to call them, they do not like to have their beliefs considered to be a religion, because they're viewing religion by the most common understanding, which is a belief in something supernatural, usually involving one or more gods, an afterlife, so on and so forth. So that's the most common understanding, and the original etymology, I would assume, of religion itself, right, is these, what we would think of as like Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, so on and so forth. However, technically speaking, a religion can also be defined as simply an idea that brings people together. So in that sense, people who believe in evolution could be considered to have a religious belief. Now, atheists and agnostics do not like to hear that. In fact, it's very upsetting for them when a religious person will say, well, you believe in the religion of evolution. And they'll say, no, it's not a religion. It's based on evidence, and religions are always based on faith or whatever. And so what's happening there is you have two different definitions that can both be ascribed to religion, and they're getting conflated together. So so when we talk about religion, there's some truth to what you just said. Religion does give people a concept of something to hold on to.
But when you argue about...
Go ahead. What were you saying? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I think there's a delay and a bit of roboting. I was just saying that religion and politics are kind of the same thing, in that when we get angry and passionate and upset at each other, eventually questions of true and false and right and wrong and good and evil will be invoked. And in the end, that's why people come to blows and, have civil wars with each other about, whether to be a republic or a monarchy, or, to be a communist, or, some other thing. So I think if you're prepared to kill each other over something like that, it must take precedence over, some lesser form of belief. like I prefer chocolate, but you prefer vanilla. It's something that we're prepared to invoke ideas of right and wrong and good and evil over, and and then I suppose eventually people will say, you're wrong, you're good, you're evil. I think know what I mean about these arguments, how what they could lead to.
Well, this is actually where the comparison is relative, because ultimately, whether you're talking about a belief in something supernatural, like a god or something, or you're talking about a strong political belief, as again, these are two different uses of the word religion. However, they do ultimately come together in the behavior of people, because groups of people will
Mhm.
kill other groups of people because of different beliefs in a god, and they will kill other groups of people based on different political beliefs, right? So they do share that similarity there. So ultimately it comes down to, what are people doing with their beliefs, and then are their beliefs justified? And that's where it gets really sticky, because I don't think that religious beliefs are justified. Personally, depending on what we're talking about, beliefs in supernatural things, I think that that's just an unjustifiable belief or unjustified belief. So to kill other people because they have a different belief in something that has no evidence, to me, is insane. Political beliefs, though, can often be held without any evidence either, because it's just a belief in an ideal, a political ideal, right? What is the right way to govern our society, or what is the right way to govern the world? Even some of these people, like Hitler, for example, he wanted to basically rule the free world at one point. So it can be very similar in that way, and that's why we need to actually have these conversations are important, because we need to encourage people
Mm.
to iron out their differences in a non-violent manner. Being different is okay. I don't have a problem with people being different. I don't have a problem with people being religious, even though I'm not religious. I'm an independent
Yes,
centrist. Oh, go ahead.
yes, but we all. Yes, sorry. There seems to be a bit of a delay, and that's why I think we keep interrupting each other. Or I think you finish, or when in fact you haven't. Um, so, um, I think I will question your definition of supernatural. If superstition, did you say supernatural or superstition as far as God is concerned?
Well, I personally think it's the
Or
same.
do you
I
think they're
said,
the same thing?
yeah, no, I think that those are the two, the same, one and the same. I said supernatural to not be offensive with the wording, but for me, it's, from my view, it's all superstition and supernatural are one and the same thing. To be honest with you, I think that
Yeah,
these beliefs are.
but
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I think these beliefs are just in when we talk about religion, like with the afterlife, the gods, that that kind of thing, that the invented history. I think that all that stuff, like a global flood. There was no global flood, but lots of religions have these stories that are really neat stories when you read them. In some cases, about a flood narrative, right? So they invent these stories or copy somebody else's story, but that never happened. And so to believe in things that
but,
just
but
are
how do you
demonstrably.
know?
Oh, go ahead. How
I
do I
mean,
know?
how do you know it never happened?
Because of science, and it's not just one field of science that's completely debunked the flood myth, but every single field of science that's relative: geology, archaeology, anthropology, meteorology, biology. I could go on and on and on. Every single field of science agrees there was no global flood. There just is. It's demonstrably
How would
false.
they know? I mean, what proofs do
Well,
they
that's the
have
beauty.
about
That's the
something that could?
Yeah, that's the beauty of science, is that it's based on evidence. So we know, because of radiometric dating, how roughly how old the Earth is. We know, because of geology, how layers are formed, sedimentary layers, stratification they call it. We know, because of archaeology and biology, that the fossil record, how it's layered. I could go on. We know from meteorology there's not enough water in the atmosphere or in the water table to flood the whole Earth. So there's just a number of different ways. We also know from archaeology that there were civilizations that lived uninterrupted during the time when this flood supposedly was global, right? And so we have a myriad of different ways that we can say there was no global flood. Demonstrably false.
Well, from what I remember of mythology in China and Greece. I mean, there was this mention of a flood, but perhaps there's no point in arguing about it because I'm just saying religion has a purpose, and the people who have a religion seem to be, well, at least they can claim to have been around for longer than anyone else has. But as for superstition, I think you can define distinguish superstition from black magic and spells and potions, and from say somebody believing the Abrahamic God, saying good and evil come from God. If we suffer, we're probably being punished for our sins, and it's almost impossible to disprove, isn't it?
No, not necessarily. It depends on what we're talking about. How, as far as the existence of a God, if it's supernatural, meaning that it exists outside of the natural world, which includes the entire universe that we could observe. So if there's something that exists outside of that, outside of time and space, then we have no way of even observing it, measuring it, or testing it, or even conceiving of it. So in that way,
we can't.
Right. Is that way we should all remain
Well,
agnostic.
people have conceived of it. People have.
Well,
people have conceived of it, and
yeah, but they make claims that actually are incoherent, like the Trinity, for example. Right, the Trinity claim from the Christians, the Trinitarian Christians.
That's a peculiarly Christian thing.
Yes, but I'm just using it as an example. That claim is incoherent. It's a square circle. They talk about a square circle, which square circles cannot exist as far as we understand. It violates the law of identity. You can either have a square or you can have a circle. You can't have a square circle. But the Trinitarian Christians are the largest Christian group. You have Catholics are Trinitarian, Protestants are Trinitarian, and they insist that there's this Trinity. No matter how many times you tell them, that's incoherent. The whole concept literally makes no sense. So the fact that people can make these claims is true, but the claims, when you actually look at them, are nonsensical. And so that's the problem, is that all religions do this in their own way. They make claims that just when you break down the claim itself, you could say, well, that's can't be true because it violates laws of logic, the laws of physics, or whatever. We have no evidence of this. It's completely incoherent. You could make a belief if you want to, but you can't justify that belief. You have to either believe it.
Because you can't explain it logically. But if you don't invoke the Trinity, then I suppose Jewish and Islamic beliefs make sense. Because they don't have to explain the Trinity.
Yeah, at least in regards to the Trinity. Now, there are Unitarian Christians, I think, so that not all Christians are Trinitarians. The Unitarian, there's even modal oneness Christians who also reject the Trinity. So there are Christians who also.
But then they would be treated as heretics.
Within the Christian, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So, but the fact remains that Christianity is still the most powerful religious group in the world. But then you could say, well, might makes right. Christians are more powerful because they are more successful at imperialism than the other religion. So something must work there.
Yeah, and I think that's where you and I will have a fundamental disagreement. So I think you and I will have agreement, actually, when we talk about, it depends on how we frame this, the nature and purpose of religion, because that's kind of loaded up. But like I said, so if we say, what is the nature and purpose of religion? And if it's building empiricism, then religion is in fact, I would say religion is the single most successful way to get a lot of people to do some really terrible things. They think, now if depends on if you and I agree if it's terrible or not. That's where we're going to disagree. I think we'll both agree that religion is a very successful tool, and it has a purpose that's been implemented very successfully to get people to band together and do stuff in a coordinated effort.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say from my perspective that what religion has produced is a lot of violence and hatred, a lot of othering of people, whereas you might say this is a wonderful thing to create these empires, and empires are successful, and so therefore it must be good. So you and I are probably going to have a disagreement there as to whether it's good or not, but good and bad are subjective, right? There is no such thing as an objective good or objective bad, because that's a value
Unless
judgment.
you have religion.
It's still not objective. It's because everybody has their own religious preference, and we can't look at religion as an objective um, basis, in that it has to be, in order for something to go from subjective to objective, it has to be agreed upon. So it's like
Well,
a goal
yes.
that,
So I think we can agree that the Abrahamic religions are more powerful than the non-Abrahamic religions,
yes,
can't we?
they've been very successful. Yeah, and I think we could look at why they've been successful from a political and historical lens, as opposed
Mhm.
to they've been successful because they're based in some kind of reality. And that's another problem I see with the religious thing, is it's just these, and that's why I just was curious. You made a comment I would like that I'm not understanding. You said that superstition, like belief in black magic and whatnot, is different than the religious beliefs. And setting aside the efficiency or the power of the religious groups compared to these pagan groups, set that aside for a moment. How can you differentiate between what people would refer to as magic or what people refer to as a miracle, as far as evidence goes? Because on the surface, they appear to me to be the exact same thing, the magic and the superstition. And then over here, you have the miracles and the supernatural. To me, there's no difference other than the claim itself. Unless, yeah. So do you see a difference there? And if so, how do you differentiate those two things?
Well, it's about cause and effect and what you attribute causes and effects to. So you may have heard that God is supposed to be the uncaused first cause, and maybe you're familiar with that verse in uh, the book of Isaiah that says God created good and evil, and therefore, on that basis, you can attribute good and evil to God, and therefore you might suppose that you are being punished if you are suffering for sin, because
Yeah,
that's the construct of religion, that's meant to make us correct ourselves when we feel pain and suffering.
and that is ultimately a problem, because the saying that God is a first cause is actually just as coherent as the Trinity concept. And people who don't really get deep into philosophy have no idea how it can make such a bold statement, but it breaks
Let
down
me
log.
let me explain, and it's just a two-sentence explanation,
Yeah, no,
really.
yeah, yeah. Feel
So,
free.
if there was a creation and we are here because then something created us and our parents and ancestors, etc., then there must have been a creator, and then the religious would just say, well, that creator must have been God, mentioned in the book of Genesis, etc.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with the concept, but it's actually incoherent, because so the reason that I say these religions are false, and I'm confident in that, is because you need, in order to hold a what I consider a justified belief, you need one of two things, or both. You either need empirical evidence, or you need an argument that's valid and leads to a sound conclusion.
There you
So you
go.
haven't.
I made an argument that if there was a creation, there must have been a creator.
Right, right, but that actually breaks down. It's not a valid argument that leads to a sound conclusion, because it's fallacious. And if your
How
argument
so?
contain, because what we're doing is presupposing that this is a creation. That's the question at hand. So it's called question begging. The other fallacy is called special pleading, because then the question I would follow up with was, well, who created the creator? And you would say, well, nobody created God. Which then I would
Because
say,
of the
well, how do you know?
uncaused first cause.
Right, exactly. That's
Um,
Aristotelian, right? The prime mover. But then that, like I said, that's actually special pleading, because if you're going to say God doesn't need a creator, then what justifies saying the universe needed a creator? So you have two fallacies already introduced into the claim.
could we just stop there? But you've heard of the problem of infinite regression. So I
Yeah,
guess philosophers have said, well, instead of asking endless questions of who created, your ancestors and evolution, we will assume that, something created
I have heard of the problem with
everything
infinite.
around.
Yeah, I am familiar with the
And
problem.
unless you can, say, okay, it's always there. I mean, I think Aristotle said, well, the universe was always there, and therefore it didn't need a creator. And you might be of this view. Perhaps you
Yeah,
are.
yeah, I am actually, and it's actually you can see it in other religions too, like Buddhism, for example. Right, there was no creation event, but you could get there with physics, with cosmological models, and there is no actual problem with infinite regress if you understand time. Infinite regress was considered a problem because their understanding of time was based on a theory of time, but block theory of time actually resolves that. And you could also look at different religions and how they have their own solution to that, which
I'm
is like
afraid
an
I don't
endless
know about.
cycle.
I'm afraid I
What's
don't know
that?
about block theory of time. I haven't heard of this block theory of time,
So
but maybe
go
you
ahead.
don't need to know about this because it sounds esoteric and something to do with quantum physics, presumably.
Not well. It could be involved. Quantum physics can be involved, but it's not specifically about quantum physics. But you can implore quantum physics into the conversation to try and explain it. But like block theory
Well,
of time.
I know nothing about quantum physics, and I suspect most people don't. And I suppose it's just it would be just as well as if we made the argument simple, so most people can understand it. So you would say, the universe doesn't need to be created because it was already there. But this is just an extension of saying, God created the universe, and then God didn't need to be created because he was always there. So it's all
But it's
about
the more
different
yes, but
stages of.
it's the more parsimonious explanation. To say the universe is always there is the most parsimonious. If you say, well, the universe was created, but God was always there, you're adding another step. So you have a less
Yes,
parsimonious explanation, right? So if you have to bite the bullet on something always being there, you may as well, it makes most logical sense to start to have the least amount of unexplained causes. So you, instead of adding what another fallacy
Occam's
called Johnny
razor.
Gap, what's that?
So you're talking about Occam's razor, aren't you? That
Exactly.
the
Yes.
simplest
Yep.
explanation must be the one
Yeah,
to go
exactly.
for. And
Exactly right. Occam's razor. Yeah.
but I would invite you to consider that a creation needs to have a creator.
Yeah. Creation does need to have a creator, but again, that's the question begging fallacy. So this is where these claims break down, is because that's a
What do you
fallacious
mean by
argument.
question begging? Because it seems perfectly logical to say if something was created, something created it.
Well, you can make that claim, and that's perfectly fine. However, we don't know the universe was created. So that's what you're trying to figure out. So if the universe was created, well, then yes, the universe would need a creator. But if the universe wasn't created, then no creator was necessary. So the question at hand is, was the universe created? So to insist that it is a creation, or to infer that it is a creation, is now begging the question of the creator. And that's the fallacious side of the argument.
Well,
And that's
you could say,
you
well, it's mentioned in the Torah, it's mentioned in the Quran,
but
and
that's the claim, not the
and the
evidence.
people who believe in that sort of thing will say, well, God sent the Torah and the Quran as messages to humanity.
And again, that's the claim, but that the claim isn't the evidence, right? So we haven't made any progress in actually substantiating the claim. We just got a claim.
Yeah, so you could say, I don't believe it. I don't think the Torah is from God, and then I guess you'll be faced with these Jews and these Muslims who say, we believe that our book came from God, and we are more than you.
Yes, that is the problem as far as I see it, is what happens when you have these different beliefs, because it's not even just like what the Christians and Muslims, for example, have done to each other, but look at what the Muslims have done to other Muslims, and look at what the Christians have done to other Christians. They've deemed certain groups heretical groups, as you would say, and they kill them and they murder them, and they rob, they take their land, and oftentimes will assault their women, and kill children. I mean, it's just non-combatants get murdered and massacred all the time, and it's Muslim to Muslim, Christian to Christian, Jew to Jew. Look, between Judah and Israel, they were having war, supposedly, if you read the Old Testament. So I mean, it's not even just the terrible things that these people do to non-religious people or different religions, but even within their own religion, which tells me that neither one of these people have any access to any truth. If they're willing to kill each other, two people who believe in Allah or who believe in Jesus or whatever, and they're willing to kill each other because they're not holding the correct Allah belief or the correct Jesus belief, tells me there is no correct belief.
I think if you did ask them, they would have to acknowledge that God did forbid murder. But then I guess they'll say, well, it's justified for whatever reason they claim. It was justified, he did it, she started it, etc. And I suppose these things would happen when the laws are not clear. And I suppose you can measure how, or easy to follow, and I guess if they're not easy to follow, if they're unclear, and then people argue about them, that causes a conflict. So I guess we go for, the clearest guidance.
And I would also say that again, to kind of highlight something you brought up earlier, it's not just these religious groups that do this. Political groups do the same thing, right? They different politics, and so they kill each other over their politics. Even the same country, like here in America,
in the same Communist Party or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got the Democrats literally at the Republicans' throats and vice versa. I mean, America is really divisive politically, and it has been, but it's really at a bad place right now. And so it's not just religion that does this, so that in my opinion is the issue is with human behavior. And the correction, I think, is figuring out how to fix the human behavior thing and looking at religion and politics as a solution when it's clearly fed into the problem. Doesn't seem to me to just continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. That's just called banging your head into a wall.
Well, I think people find it difficult to say, my system of belief is wrong and I won't follow it anymore. And I mean, that's a problem, isn't it? It's pride, it's ego. I won't admit my ancestors have been wrong for X number of centuries, so I'll just carry on, and you can't make me, do this thing. But I think if we were being reasonable about it, because you've already admitted that communists can kill each other over some political disagreement about strategy and policy. So even secular political ideologies can cause conflict and people to have civil wars about these matters.
Absolutely. And because the danger, the reason it's so problematic is it's twofold. One, every single human being must struggle with the ego. And we need to have an ego because it's a sense of self. And if we don't take care of ourselves and prioritize ourselves to a certain degree, then we're not going to survive as an individual, and group survival requires the individuals to propagate, obviously. The other issue is so learning to balance that ego. The other issue is that we cannot control what we believe. We're either convinced by something or we're not. And I know a lot of people like to think that they actually choose their beliefs and they have this thing called free will. But there is no libertarian free will. And I say libertarian not in the political sense, but meaning in the freest sense of free will. We are heavily influenced by our external environment. So most people who are raised in a Muslim country will grow up to become Muslim. And most people who are raised in a Christian country will grow up to be Christian, which is why these religions continue to grow and are so powerful, is because children grow up believing these things are true. And then as adults, they just simply accept it as truth without being able to critically think about it. And I know that's a tough pill for people to swallow because a lot of people really are desperate to hold on to this idea that they're in complete control of their lives, but it's simply not the case.
Well, the religion of mum and dad will always hold sway over all of us because, if we love mum and dad, we want to believe that they're right and, knew how to think and reason, etc. So at the end of the day, it becomes a demographic
Yes, exactly right.
solution.
Because it starts at home with mom and dad, but it's your neighbors, the people that your family is associating with, your other family members, your employers, your friends, everybody around you in your environment is holding on to some kind of similar belief in your closest circle. And then so it becomes very dangerous, not just physically dangerous, but emotionally dangerous to question those beliefs, right? And so it is very demographic, as you said, which is why
So
they
it
become
becomes
so
a
powerful.
birth rate thing, and then it becomes a marriage thing, right?
Yeah, or you could say it's a curse. You could look at it one of two ways. And I think that's where you and I are going to have the disagreement, is because you and I think would both agree that religions are very powerful as an institution, and as a concept. They bring people, massive, large numbers of people together because of this demographic thing. And so the leaders so religion did not start out this way. The first religions, what we call weren't even necessarily religions per se. They weren't organized in such a way. They were beliefs in supernatural phenomenon, and they call it animism. So our ancient ancestors would look at the waves on the sea. Oh, some kind of feedback.
Hello?
Did you hear that? That was weird.
I
Let me
didn't
see.
hear. I heard you go quiet. What did you hear?
Yeah, let me. I'm getting a feedback. I don't know why I'm getting this feedback.
I'm not hearing any feedback this end anyway.
Okay. I think it
Mhm.
was my end. That was so weird. Okay, so anyway, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, I had the YouTube app open in the background and it was playing. That might clear up some of this delay. So that's my fault. Okay, anyway, so animism. So they would look at the thunder and the lightning, and they didn't have any understanding of atmospheric pressure, moisture in the air, and the things we know now from science. So they would believed these natural phenomenon had some kind of anthropomorphic trait behind it, because all they saw around them was other animals, and they were a special type of animal we call Homo sapiens. So they would ascribe anthropomorphic traits to the weather, and they would start worshiping the weather. And as they went from hunter gatherers to more of a sedentary, they call it the farming revolution, or yeah, the farming revolution, which is where they started growing crops and settling down. Then they would start worshiping the weather because they needed the rain for their crops, right? And it just seemed like a natural progression for them. It wasn't used to create in groups or out groups. That was a much later evolution of how religion ends up getting used. And we see this in the most ancient civilizations in Sumer, Akkad, Ugarit, in these places in Mesopotamia. And by the time we get the written record, we have this fully developed concept of the creation event, global flood narratives, Cain and Abel stories. These are origin stories of people just trying to figure out where they came from. We see it like in Rome, for example, with Romulus and Remus, right? These two boys being raised by a pack of wolves. Well, we obviously know that children aren't raised by wolves. Wolves eat children, if anything. But this is how it's a origin story that gets invented. And then governor or people who are in charge realize that this belief that ties people together, because they don't know any better. The common man is an idiot. He's uneducated. All he can do is just help grow the food and kill the wild animals that come into the village. And they don't know any better. And so the leaders continue to use this religion as a tool to control their little villages and their little groups of society. And then the problem 2,000-3,000 years later, it gets more technical, more advanced. They start coming up with more fantastic stories. They start looking at other people and their religions and saying, our religion's the true religion. We have to go kill those people because what we really want is their resources. And getting everybody to go kill a bunch of people isn't that easy to do. It's dangerous, for one thing. And most people are born with empathy, so they don't want to go kill everybody. But they don't want to piss off the god, because the god controls the thunder and the lightning. So they go do it anyway. And then they become a
Yes,
very successful, powerful nation. And then they say, oh, look, God must be behind all this. You see what I'm saying? It's a self-perpetuating
yes.
problem.
God protects us, or harms us. But what you said earlier about these early humans who started growing things, and they wanted rain. So I suppose they thought, we can't just make rain on our crops, and therefore we have to pray to the god of agriculture, the god of rain, or whatever it is that they knew that they couldn't achieve themselves as humans. And then I guess eventually they came up with the most powerful Abrahamic God that created everything, can do anything, knows everything, and is also perfectly moral, and can read the hearts and minds of people. And that I suppose is the most powerful God that we can think of.
Yeah, and it actually starts with Zoroastrianism. It's this Ahura Mazda is the one supreme monotheistic God. The Jews during Second Temple period is when they adopted monotheism, because the Jews were originally henotheistic. They had many gods in their pantheon because they were a Semitic group of people who actually came from the land of Canaan and the Canaanite tradition of the pantheon of gods, which included like the Baal cycle, Asherah, Yahweh, so on and so forth. Once the Second Temple period, when the Persians released the Jews to go back to Jerusalem after the Persians had defeated the Babylonians, and remember during the Babylonian exile, they had still influence from the Sumerian tradition, what ultimately started as a Sumerian tradition, and that's Sumer, not Sumerian. It's with the U instead of the A. And so you get the flood story out of the Enuma Elish and the creation narrative, the 7 tablets of creation turn into the 7 days of creation, so on and so forth. So these stories just get borrowed and then changed a little bit so it fits their narrative or their understanding of things. And so
But really, it is as simple as, well, we're going to worship the most powerful God. That's it. And if we worship the most powerful God, we're going to win over the others who don't. And then everybody thought, okay, we'll all worship the most powerful God. But certain groups have different ideas about the correct way of worshiping the most powerful God.
That's exactly
this,
what
I guess, is
that's exactly
the problem
what it
of
is.
schism and splintering.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is, sister. And the purpose and nature of it, as the show is titled, is exactly that: is to get people to worship what they believe is the most powerful God, and the ones that are most successful technologically are the ones that actually win the wars. There are no gods, and so what really gives them victory is having the most number of people carrying the most number of pitchforks, so on and so forth. And that's where they actually get their victories from. They become powerful because their numbers increase and they're able to subdue or overwhelm their enemy. The gods are literally have no effect or impact because the gods don't exist.
Well,
but the belief is
can
what
I
it
invite you to maybe look at it this way? Because I think we can both agree on what it means to be omnipotent and omniscient, but being perfectly moral, that I think is a little problematic in that you will have a different idea about what is moral, and so will I, but the idea of this perfectly moral God is that we can at least theorize about a being that does know which laws we should follow, having made it for us, and then we can say, well, obviously the Abrahamic God, people who believe in the Abrahamic religions will be more powerful than the ones who don't, and this is true at the moment. And then we can argue about the different Abrahamic religions, and I mean, I guess the important thing about the Abrahamic religions is they have divine revelation and it has laws, and we may argue about the correct conception of God and the correct way to follow these laws, but that at least has brought the Abrahamic religions above the non-Abrahamic religions. So I guess there's something going there, isn't there?
Well, it's been very effective because of the things I mentioned. It brings people together in large groups. And so what you get, it's a race to the top, right? Whoever gets the largest number of people together to work towards a common purpose is going to be the strongest group, and anybody else just gets mowed down in the process because they're just not strong enough to defend themselves. And so we see this like with European empiricism, with the development of Rome, actually long before that, right? Rome became this giant nation. Once it decided that it would just grab one religion, it became extremely powerful. It was already growing. The Rome was obviously the Greco-Roman period, right before the change of the millennium. But what's Constantine, and I can't remember the other guy's name.
Augustus, but I think Rome became powerful when it was still a republic, and when it became an empire and only had an emperor, an absolute monarch, then it declined. This is what Edward Gibbon said anyway, that it had peaked by the time it got to Augustus, because then it became corrupt, because absolute power corrupted the political system, because the absolute monarchs in Rome abused their power. And then I guess all the generals said, well, I can control the emperor. I can I have all these men under me who will do my bidding and do my fighting for me, and with these men I will win. And then there were all these civil wars with all these Roman generals trying to be emperor, and eventually they fought each other so much that they fell, until Rome fell. And but then Rome did not have a proper book. I know that Rome used the Old Testament. They basically took it off the Jews, didn't they? I mean, the Jews couldn't really stop the Roman Empire from taking their holy book and then creating the New Testament and putting it on top of the Old Testament and say, well, this is our new religion now. This is Roman Catholicism. And even after Rome fell, there were all these European countries who wanted to be Roman Catholic, and then they got fed up with Roman Catholicism, and then they became Protestant, and then they became liberal. So, I mean, there is a pattern of behavior here, but I guess at the moment there seems to be a problem in the West, and more and more people are complaining about their government, and this suggests that all is not quite well.
Yeah, and the complaint, and you're right. So the most successful empires, there have been a number of empires throughout history. I mentioned the Babylonians. Prior to that was the Akkadians. The first empire would have been the Sumer, and after Sumer, the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians, and then the Romans, or excuse me, the Persians and the Romans, and so on and so forth. But what we're seeing though is actually the Roman Empire. While Rome did technically fall, Rome really became what we consider now to be the Western world, right? Europe, North America, so on and so forth. And so, in fact, both American continents. And so, this is just, we don't, coordinate or organize under the banner of Rome, but it's still the same concept of what we think of with the Western world. So it just took on a different name and a different face. But this is what it's produced. But the most successful empires are the ones that actually allowed diversity in religious thought, right? Like Persia, for example, they let everybody go back and worship their own god as long as you paid the taxes to the Persian king. As long as you paid your taxes and dues, they didn't care what gods you followed. It wasn't until it became a problem that it was a problem. And Rome did the same thing. They were perfectly happy being pagan. They adopted the Greek pantheon of gods, and amalgamated it into the Roman pantheon of gods during the Greco-Roman period. And then they took parts of Eastern mythology and Greek Stoicism. They were happy to adopt that. Eventually, they were happy to adopt Christianity. And they just take whatever works and they implement it for ultimately what are political reasons. That's really what it gets down to at the end of the day, is not even about religious belief. It's about politics and globalization.
Well, yes, and it can't be denied that Christians are the ones of the three global empires, but something is happening to Christianity now. I think that there is an attempt to, try and be more religious, to fight the perceived enemies of the West and the weaponization of Christianity. I don't know if it's something you've noticed or not really.
Yeah, it is. Christianity is actually weakening, which is why Islam is now the fastest growing religion in the world next to atheism. Atheism is technically growing faster than any of the organized religions, or skepticism, however you want to say that. But there's still so few skeptics, compared to organized religious people. And Islam is far outpacing Christianity in growth. And the reason is because Christianity is mostly tied to the Western world we're talking about, and they have freedom of religion. Whereas Islam in Islamic countries, for the most part, are extremely restrictive when it comes to allowing other religious beliefs. And now I'm not saying they won't allow it. It just
yes,
depends
it depends on which country you're talking
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
I mean, obviously, there's not much religious freedom in Saudi, but then a lot of Muslims would say Saudi is the exception because it has an absolute monarch, and actually, the Gulf states are Gulf kingdoms with absolute monarchs who were put there by the Western imperialists because they'd already agreed to cooperate with the West. About the oil and that sort of thing. So
Yep.
I think what we really should concentrate our minds on is the system of government, because the American Republic is really a case in point. The founding fathers rejected absolute monarchy and said it was a tyranny, and there were the natural unalienable rights of men. And this is also a kind of presupposition based on God. And
Yes.
it would be the Abrahamic God because, it wouldn't be a different kind of God, would it?
Yeah, and I'm not a modern history buff. I studied in college. I studied ancient history, so I'm much more familiar with ancient history than I am with more contemporary history. But my understanding is that the founding fathers of America were actually very diverse. Many of them were actually deists as opposed to theists. Like
they weren't Christian.
Right, exactly. Now there are some were
proper Christian.
Yeah, some certainly were, but it was such a diverse group of beliefs. But they were all religious for the most part. There wasn't a lot of founding fathers who were like, oh, gods don't exist. They did have different God beliefs, but because of their diversity and ultimately in their belief systems, they recognized that secularism was ultimately going to be the one thing that kind of binds people together, which is religious freedom. Like people can be free to believe whatever they want, religious or not, as long as everybody toes the line and organizes and is willing to pick up their gun and fight for the country to defend our territory. They didn't care so much about beliefs, which is why they have freedom of religion, and freedom from religion is part of the Constitution, right?
Well, yes. So the founding of America represented a quantum leap in the rights of European men, at least at the time, and you can imagine why the founding fathers rejected the whole monarchy thing, because under monarchy nobody had any rights, or they would be expected to follow the religion of their king, and if they didn't, there would be trouble and discrimination and Christians being mean to each other for being the wrong kind of Christian, and being educated and enlightened men. They didn't think it was necessary to be this established Christian from whatever king was ruling them, and this is understandable. But the point of America is that nobody actually said, I'm an atheist. Well, certainly not in the time of the founding fathers. And I think that there was a reason for this, in that if you said you were an atheist, it just meant that if you thought nobody was looking over you, you would be committing all kinds of crimes because you thought you'd get away with it because you didn't believe in God or the afterlife. And that was why, even if you didn't believe in God, you would pretend to believe in God so that people would be more likely to trust you.
Exactly. And it's the social pressure that keeps a lot of people to, holding on to these beliefs that we talked about earlier, the demographic pressure, because I think it was Schopenhauer who talked about the danger, the perceived danger of speaking out in the group. It's not so much the fact that you have a different idea that's dangerous. The danger comes from saying that your group is wrong about something and you're identifying a problem within the group. This is why people like Lincoln and Martin Luther King get assassinated, right? Because everybody wants to be a racist at the end of the day, because that's what has benefited their empirical growth and the growth of their governments, and the othering, and these religions feed into that, politics feed into that. And so when somebody like a Dr. Martin Luther King steps up and starts drawing a lot of attention for saying, no, we are all equal human beings, we need to treat each other with the same kind of respect or consideration, they get killed, right? They get assassinated because they're very dangerous, because they're speaking up against what the group has already accepted to be true.
I understand that political violence does occur from time to time, and maybe even more so when you have gun rights, because yeah, that makes it more likely to happen if you have the right to own a gun, and then added to that you have the right to free speech, and then people say what they say what they mean, and people get offended, and some people might kill the speaker for it. But I suppose what is what La Rochefoucauld meant when he said, what was it? Okay, I think it was a Frenchman who said it anyway. And he said hypocrisy is the vice, is a tribute that vice pays to virtue, and this means that probably we are all occasionally hypocrites, and we try to be better than we are by pretending to believe in things we don't really believe in just to fit in. Because, at the end of the day, when we go and live with a group, we have to agree with the rules of the majority. And obviously, if we break these rules, we have to accept punishment. And that is the only way for people to be accepted if they want to go and live in a community that originally wasn't theirs, or even if it was theirs, there are certain minimum standards, like you mustn't kill, you mustn't steal, you mustn't, you know, cheat, etc. And once you have a baseline of all these minimum standards, like people thinking, well, if you're reasonable and a decent person, you would agree with all these rules. And then even if you were a thief and a murderer, etc., you would have to reluctantly agree. And maybe you might hope to get away with murder or a theft or whatever, but you would still have to pretend to agree. And then I guess if you break those rules and you're caught, you would have to accept the punishment. But otherwise, people would just kick you out. If you said, "Well, I don't think there should be a law against murder or stealing," and blah blah, but then you're kind of outing yourself as an outlaw, a subversive, a dissident, and you will be targeted.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why ultimately the ultimate truth is that morality is objective. And so what if more people would understand this, then there could be a global peace, because they would recognize that the best way to live, everybody wants to live a good life. Ultimately, every human being wants to live a good life. The problem is people, the significant majority of people, don't know what it means to live this good life. They don't know how to attain it. So they try all kinds of terrible things or crazy things that ultimately sabotage their own ability to live the good life they want to live. Objective morality is basically a way to live your best life by following a set of principles that encourage personal autonomy and freedom of thought and freedom of action without interfering with other people's freedom of thought and autonomy and freedom of action. Because my best life is lived when my neighbors are living their best life. My best life is not lived when I'm trying to control what my neighbors do because I think what's right and wrong, and I superimpose my will onto other people. It's if other people have the freedom to help me because they want to, they're going to be much more helpful and much more productive than if they're only helping me because they're my slave, right? And
Well,
the
you
thing
just
is,
want them to share your values, right? You want the people around you to kind of agree with your worldview, and then you'll feel more comfortable with them. And that's why religious groups tend to, want to live together. Um, and then I guess there are these competing religious groups. But there is a request in chat for you to answer certain questions, and one of them I have displayed, and there's another one coming up, and maybe you wouldn't mind
no, I'm
answering
happy to
them.
engage. I was looking at this, and so I'm only familiar with moral non-cognitivism. I've never heard of theological non-cognitivism, so I'd be curious as to how they're bringing those two things together. Moral non-cognitivism is to say that there are no moral facts, right? And so emotivism would be a type of non-cognitivism ethic when you talk about morals, that our morals are just derived from our emotions, which I disagree with because I'm a moral realist. I believe there are in fact true moral facts, right? So murdering is immoral fundamentally, not because we decided it's immoral or because we believe a God decided it's immoral. That's all subjective. Non-cognitivism is this stance that there's no true moral facts. And so theological non-cognitivism, I am assuming, and I don't want to misrepresent what this person's asking because like I said, I've never heard of theological non-cognitivism before. So I'm
Nor
just
have I.
if you put the two words together, what you're talking about, theological, is the theology, the belief in a God that interacts with the world. And then non-cognitivism, it would be the belief that there are no true facts about this. So that would essentially mean there is no God that makes these objective principles. It's only based on our emotions. So
Okay.
in that regard, I think that there's truth to it. I think that religions are, in fact, invented by people and do prey on people's emotions. It's not a logical position that people hold because this is where religions fall apart. Why I'm not a religious person, because like I said before, either you need the evidence or you need the argument that leads to the sound conclusion. And so far, and I've studied many religions and throughout the years and in college, as well as a hobby, I've got 3 decades of research into various religions. There isn't a single argument that can be made that leads to a sound conclusion. And there isn't no evidence whatsoever. So I would be probably considered a theological non-cognitivist at that point. I think people just do it based on their emotions.
Right. But perhaps you'll answer the second one, which I don't understand either.
Yeah, meta-ethical. Again, I think if you're talking about metaphysical, essentially, except that it's this metaphysical concept, the true nature of what something is. And I would say that I'm a moral realist, so I believe there are true moral facts, and I believe these facts are established by nature, the natural world that we live in. So we evolved as a cooperative animal. We're a social species of animals. So for our survival, we require the assistance of other human beings. Not one of us was ever raised by a wolf or something crazy like this. We all had a mother and at least one parent in the home up to a certain point. And our mother did not build the house that we live in because she was raising us. And so another human being had to build that house. And because the other human being was building the house and our mother was raising us, a different human being had to grow the food, and so on and so forth. So we rely on each other for our very survival. And so my meta-ethical position is in that there's this objective moral truths, such as murdering people is going to ultimately sabotage our own well-being and our own survival. So it doesn't make any sense. You can derive your oughts from the logic and reason of your own survival. It's best for me if I live in a society where murder is prohibited, because just people going around and recklessly or haphazardly killing each other for no justifiable reason is going to cause that society to collapse. Or if they're just allowed to go steal from each other all the time, that society will collapse. And we need these societies for our own benefit, right? I need somebody to go grow the food because I'm not a gardener. I need somebody to build the house because I'm not an architect, so on and so forth. We rely on each other. And this is how we can see that the true moral facts allow us to function together.
Right. We've discussed the no-hide laws before, haven't we?
Yes.
And I hope you will allow me to explain to you what they're for, in terms of them being the universal moral minimum. So basically, the idea is that you're a good and reasonable person if you agree to all these laws. And the first one is no idolatry, and the number two is no blasphemy. And I know they're controversial, but please bear with me. And then the next one is no murder, no theft, no sexual immorality, and then the next one is no eating an animal while it's still alive, and the final one, the seventh one, is we are obliged to establish a court and legal system. Would you be okay with the last five ones, or not really?
Now, you and I, sorry, I was heating up my coffee while I was listening to you there. You and I had discussed this, and I also had a lovely conversation with Vincent Bruno. We touched on this, I believe, in our conversation. And I have the 7 pillars of ethics, I call it. And it's very similar to the 7 Noahide laws, but I don't have anything about blasphemy or false idol worship. And
I understand. But if I might just explain to you what I think, therefore, maybe it doesn't have a universal agreement. So you were saying earlier that we can all agree that there should be a law against murder because we don't want to be murdered. So it's fair enough that we don't murder in order that others don't murder us without consequences. And the same with theft, because we have property and we want to keep it. And because we do, we have to agree that we mustn't steal the property of others. So there is this element of reciprocity in that, I won't kill you if you won't kill me. I won't steal from you if you don't steal from me. And then the sexual immorality one, I think, is well, I guess a whole can of worms, because nobody can actually agree on what is the appropriate standard of sexual morality. And obviously over the centuries it has, standards of sexual morality has gone up and down. And this I would identify as the most problematic area. With regard to, I think we can agree not to be eating animals while it's still alive, and maybe we can agree that, if we want any of these laws to be enforced, that there needs to be a court and legal system. Are you with me so far?
Yes, I think that there's actually the 3 problematic ones is no idolatry, no blasphemy, and the sexual immorality are the 3 most problematic. And I see them as all being equally problematic. But eating no animal while it's living just seems to be a humane way of existing.
Yes.
Obviously. And then as far as no theft and no murder, this is kind of one of these universal principles we understand because of objective morality. So, those are certainly applicable, I would say. And of course, you have to have a court system, because if you don't have the law codified, then how is a person going to feel justified in, accusing somebody? My neighbor has done something that's wrong. Well, if it's not written down, the neighbor can say, well, I didn't know any better, right?
And there's no police or courts, then of course you won't get justice if anybody commits a crime against you. So I think all reasonable people can agree with the 5 that I mentioned. So I guess the crucial issue is no idolatry and no blasphemy. I guess if we're going to be worshipping the most powerful God conceivable, then it would have to be the God that forbade idolatry and forbade blasphemy. So we can, at least be sure that we are all worshipping the most powerful deity conceivable, and that's, you know, really what I'm trying to say. But you don't have to be executed for idolatry or blasphemy, because, you know, we're not Jews, and it's only in the Torah that prescribes a death penalty for Jews, because that was why Jesus was executed, for his blasphemy, for saying that his papa was God. But for the rest of us, I don't think we need to fear this sort of thing, particularly in the American Republic, where you have the First Amendment, which I keep reminding Americans is supported by chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, that says, there is no compulsion in belief. Truth stands clear from error. And I'm saying, it's basically saying you have the right to express your incorrect opinions. That's fine, as long as you don't commit, you know, the other crimes. And on the matter of sexual morality, we already know that the Torah says, you know, who we can and can't marry, and who we can and can't have sex with, and ditto the Quran, but it's not as strict as the Torah. So that's it. I mean, you know, if we're going to be, you know, rushing towards agreement, we can say, well, at least we're not going to disagree about the existence of the Torah or the existence of the Quran. And if we're Gentiles, we're going to go for the Quran, which is in any case not as harsh as the Torah, because it doesn't have 36 capital offenses as codified by Maimonides. And I guess as regards the interpretation of the Quran, that of course is going to be political. You know, I have my own interpretation, but I guess a lot of Muslims would say, oh, she's not even Muslim. She can't even read Arabic, and our interpretation is better. But then I would say to them, your caliphate has crashed and burnt, and, you know, basically Sunnis are a leaderless rabble, and they don't agree with each other on much. And neither do Jews agree with each other on much. And I guess the most powerful Muslims would be the Shia Muslims in the Republic of Iran, who are, well, more united than any other kind of Muslim. And well, that's my presentation as regards, you know, which sect of which religion is more powerful, because they have used it to better effect. And obviously, if we're going to, you know, have the same legal system, we should, you know, we are really having the same moral system. Moral systems have values. So if you're a liberal, I guess you would be valuing, you know, liberty. If you're a communist, you might be valuing workers' rights. And if you're a nationalist, you might be valuing, you know, the national interest. It depends on which. But I suppose if you want, you know, something for everyone, that is the higher, that is, you know, high status enough for people to take notice. Even if you're atheist,
even in the
you
Quran,
would have to.
I'm just starting to get into the Quran, so I'm not.
Oh, you're reading it, are you?
Yeah, because I've had some interesting conversations with. Khalid was one of the Muslim brothers I just had a conversation with. Lovely conversation a couple weeks ago. But for example, in the 5th surah, what is this? Surah, I want to get the right one. I think it's 533. It specifically states here that the penalty for those who wage war against Allah and his messenger and spread mischief in the land is death, crucifixion, cutting off their hands and feet on opposite side, or exile from the land. So it does say that you should kill people and maim them if you cause mischief, which is a pretty severe punishment for mischief. And mischief, of course, is a pretty broad term, right? Which is why these things get used, you know, to justify almost any behavior.
Well, you could say that you're talking about a rebel, a revolutionary trying to overthrow the current order. And I think the penalty is pretty severe, whether you're Muslim or not. If you try to overthrow the king or, you know, the government, the penalty would be quite severe.
Yeah, and so I don't think it's just the Bible that prescribes death for blasphemy. It seems like the Quran prescribes death for blasphemy as well, because blasphemy would certainly be a type of mischief. In fact, it specifically states if you wage war against Allah and his messenger and spread mischief in the land. So mischief could be blasphemy, right? Somebody could easily interpret that, and maybe that's not what Muhammad meant when he told his scribes to write this passage down. But it's pretty open-ended there, like it's subject to a lot of interpretation. What mischief could be.
Yes, indeed. But the point is that, appointing a judge is a political appointment, and that's a matter of politics. Interpretation is a matter of politics, but you can interpret it in a harsh way or a lenient way. But I just want to remind people that there is the option of mercy. So the verse that you're talking about. This is my translation. Those that make war against God and his apostle, meaning Muhammad, and spread disorder in the land shall be slain or crucified or have their hands and feet cut off on alternate sides or be banished from the land. So you've got all these options. It could just be exile, yes. They shall be held up to shame in this world and sternly punished in the hereafter, except those that repent before you reduce them. Another option for mercy. This is, I think worth pointing out.
Yeah, it does say in the following.
For you must know that God is forgiving and merciful.
Yeah, it does say that if they repent, that you should show them, you should seize them. And I think seize in this sense is actually meaning to embrace them. I don't think it's meant in a violent manner. And because it does say Allah is forgiving. However, it also says further on that Allah basically is determining who receives justice and who receives mercy and who receives punishment. It is Allah. Ultimately, it's an indicator that there actually is no free will, that Allah is the one pulling the strings. And the Hebrew Bible essentially says the same thing. In fact, so does the Christian's version of it, that God is really the one in control. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I create the sickness as much as I create the cure, so to speak. He tells Moses, right, put your hand in your cloak, and he infects it with disease. And then he says, pull your hand out of your cloak. Who do you think is in control of this disease? And I'm paraphrasing here, right? So that's why I think that the Calvinists actually have the most defensible view as far as just what the scripture, the Christian Bible actually says when you look at all the texts. And it's so, I mean, it just, like I said, these things are so open to interpretation that it becomes, in my opinion, very problematic. I just recently had a debate.
Well, I really think that, we already know that US Supreme Court appointments are very fiercely fought over by every president who fights to get his man or woman into the Supreme Court. And we know why, because it is a matter of interpretation. I completely agree. But we're only talking about, the thing in theory and how it would be if everything was working correctly. And, we get the interpretation that is considered to be most just. And this is something, at least, that we have these rules and we have these options for mercy. And therefore, I think the Quran is clearly a more sophisticated document than the Torah, which is sort of, death for everything, or plenty of things anyway.
Well, the Quran is certainly more, I would agree, it's certainly more sophisticated. It was written, 1,000 years later. So you would hope that thought had evolved in 1,000 years. That's quite a period of time. And there's been so much the Quran was able to pull from, because it wasn't just the Torah or the Tanakh that the Quran pulled from, but you had all this philosophical belief that had, like I mentioned, there's Greek Stoicism that's influencing these ideas. You have Eastern theologies that are influencing the ideas, this concept of karma and reincarnation. All this stuff comes into play. The middle way, right? We talk about Buddhism, and what was the Buddha really getting at with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path? He was really trying to get people to understand what he would define as the middle way, which is simply about having balance in your life, balancing your decisions.
It's very hard to apply, don't you think? The
it does principle. It does take work, because again, these are open to interpretation, right?
Mm.
That is the problem with all these different beliefs, and one is not necessarily more difficult to understand than the other. It's just all of it is so wide open. Some of it is very simple, like don't steal. That's very simple, basic concept. If it doesn't belong to you and you take it, you're stealing. But when it comes to something like murder, for example, we could say, well, yeah, I shouldn't go out and, kill my neighbor because his apple tree is dropping apples in my yard and I don't eat the fruit, whatever it might be. That seems like a pretty easy thing to understand. But when you say pick up your weapons and go over to the country next door, it's okay to kill them. And we're not going to call it murder. We're just going to redefine that as war. So it gets really sticky. When is it murder? When is it self-defense? When is it manslaughter?
Yeah. Well, I hope you will get to the principles of warfare in the Quran soon, because it does have principles of treating prisoners of war and forgiving the country that transgressed against you. But if they do it again, you will have to fight them. It's and also not killing non-combatants and leaving priests and monasteries alone, and you know not hurting children and people who are not actively fighting the war, which I don't think is present in the Torah. So all I'm saying is, if it's supposed to be from the same God, why not pick the one that gives us more liberties and rights than the other one? And they're only two, you see, they're only two. So I just don't see what the difficulty is. I guess we just still want to trust our corrupt and incompetent ruling classes to make up the rules as they go along, because we're so used to it, right? We're so used to complaining about them and knowing they're incompetent and corrupt and will start a war and make us suffer when their war goes wrong, um, and causing inflation, etc. I sometimes think that liberalism is also faith based. Why do liberals keep thinking that liberalism will come right one of these days? Isn't this a kind of irrational faith as well? You know, and,
Yeah,
and, and they don't even have codified principles.
yeah, and I admit, that as an independent centrist, the reason I'm independent is because I'm pretty much equally frustrated with the right and the left here in America. I think both sides are problematic. I think that the most effective government system would be a blend of capitalism and socialism. I don't think you can be strictly capitalist, and I don't think you can be strictly socialist or communist. And I think throughout history, we've seen how these both have led to their own problems, right? But I think a blend of the two is probably the most effective way to govern a society. But I'm not a politician and I'm not educated in politics. And so who am I to even have an opinion on this, right? It just really is almost a mute point, what I think.
Well, I'm really trying to make it simple for people in that, we will never agree with each other because we don't think, you know, other people have opinions that will withstand the test of time. Because when people die, it's like, well, it's time to try something else now. The king is dead, the dictator is dead. Let's try something new, and then they will change things, usually for the worse. And therefore, if they have a system of rules, even if they don't really believe in God, at least they can think, well, it's been around for X number of centuries, and there's this powerful group of Muslims or Jews or Christians who follow these rules, so they must have done something right. It's that kind of idea, which is, I guess, a prop. We'll never know for sure why they're still around, but if they follow their own rules reasonably well, they'll get along with each other better, and they'll be stronger than other groups who are not quite so nice to each other, and enforce the rules unfairly, and there's one rule for the rich and another for the poor, because I think however dim-witted you think some people are, they'll be able to tell when the rules are not enforced fairly, and if the system is rigged, they will be able to tell. And that's why, there used to be a saying about, not only must justice be done, it must be seen to be done. And that's why our ruling classes have to be above board, and not be thought of as, as incompetent and corrupt. And I guess nowadays they don't even care to put on an appearance of competence and, principle.
Well, the corruption is the problem, and that's, I don't care what political system you put into place. It's none of it is immune to corruption, and corruption is ultimately what really drives what causes it to fall apart. Because if you were to say, okay, let's accept, communism, for example, right, and there was no oligarchy, there was no corruption whatsoever. Well, maybe communism would be a perfectly suitable way to govern the entire world, but because of corruption, it's completely defunct. And the same thing with capitalism. If you said, well, let's just go with capitalism and no corruption, right, and then everybody would say, okay, we could flourish under this system. But because of corruption, and religions are the same thing, I would say. Most religions, as I have studied them, are trying to get people to bond together, right, as we've talked about here. It's the corruption within the religion that causes then people, to do terrible things. Because like you said, even in the Quran, it tells you to be, peaceful and merciful and no compulsion in religion and so on and so forth. But what we see are Muslims, the Shiites and the Sunnis, murdering each other, murdering non-combatants, destroying libraries like they did in Iran, for example, destroying non-military buildings and what we call civilian structures and stuff like that. And they both believe in the same God. So it's they're
not supposed to do it.
What's that?
Yeah. We know that they're not supposed to do it because the Quran doesn't tell them to destroy libraries and things. But I mean, there's actually a verse that commands Muslims to speak the truth, even if it is against themselves.
And that's the problem with these religious books, is that they were written so long ago, they didn't really understand the problems they were creating with the contradictions. Because as we read earlier, it says anyone creating mischief, you can execute them, you could crucify them, you could chop off parts of their body if they're causing mischief in your land. And so the people who are burning this library and killing these non-combatants are saying, hey, the Quran justifies this because they're causing mischief. And so and the Bible is the same, susceptible to the same exact thing. It says, don't kill people.
But there is this option of mercy and exile and the, less severe forms of punishment.
Yeah. It's an option.
It's a more sophisticated document than the Torah. So obviously it requires a bit of discernment. Shall I just exile this person, or shall I execute them, or But anyway, it offers a range of options, and I suppose you might just be able to choose one that seems fair enough, and that's all that is necessary, really, to seem fair enough. You don't have to be perfectly just. You just have to be fair enough so that people don't rise up and think you're corrupt. And talking about corruption, I think corruption is just ignoring truth. It doesn't even have to go so far as to lie and to take bribes and whatever. I think people are corrupt when they ignore the truth and pretend not to understand and look the other way. And I think atheists will also be able to say that they would prefer to deal with people who are honest and reasonable, and maybe have a few principles that they are known to follow, whether or not they believe in God or not. But obviously, if you really believe in God who knows your heart and mind, then you're more likely to obey, right? Because you're afraid of being punished. But if you obey, even if it is not with such complete obedience and trust in God, well, as long as most people obey. And then
that does actually, one of the reasons that governments, the leaders, have used these beliefs is because they are so effective. Because the government, at the end of the day, is always going to be outnumbered by the free people, or the ruling class, those who are ruled, right? The ruling class is always the significant minority. So how do you control the bigger party. Well, if you get them to believe that there's an invisible man who sees them when they're sleeping and literally everything they do, even when the police aren't around or the military's not around, it causes them to police themselves to a certain degree. So it's an extremely effective way of getting people to kind of do what you tell them they're supposed to do, even when you cannot be everywhere at all times to enforce it yourself. That becomes irrelevant because they believe that the invisible man is there watching over them. And the punishment is going to be this eternal hellfire. It's very compelling, right?
Yeah. So it ensures compliance and therefore a higher trust society than what we have now. And also it makes it, with regard to sexual morality, it will help married couples stay together in
But we
their
don't even,
onerous
I mean,
undertaking of rearing children.
we can't even come to an object if we don't just embrace an objective, truly objective standard, which is, or egalitarian concept of equal rights and personal freedom to people, then we have to quibble about what sexual morality actually even means, right?
Well, it really means a gold standard of marriage. You're not supposed to have sex with anyone, not your spouse. I guess in practice people cheat, but at least they won't be flaunting it, right? That's the thing. People are just flaunting that, and this makes it difficult for stable marriages and stable families and stable children, which would have an effect on the crime rate eventually when disturbed children, abused children, become adults and
Yeah, but
act out
that's,
their trauma.
would you say, not having sex outside of marriage, that's not sexual morality in my worldview. That's comes from a religious perspective, right? I don't think
Well,
there's anything,
exactly.
yeah, I don't think there's
Exactly.
anything immoral about having sex outside of marriage. There's nothing unethical about that, in my opinion, whatsoever. Religious
I think
views also
Buddhists
say that,
might also have a problem with sex outside marriage as well as Hindus, and maybe the only religions that have a problem with that sort of thing are the ones that are in the top 5 world religions, and the ones who are maybe not so strict, just don't make it in the top 5.
but the point I'm making is it's completely subjective. You've said, well, this is the standard for subjective morality, excuse me, I'm sorry, you said this is the standard for moral sexual behavior, and I'm saying, well, that's a standard, but you have no justification for saying it's the standard because it's not objective at all. It's simply a subjective interpretation that's what you've decided, and other like-minded people, right, have decided this is what sexual purity is, sexual morality is. And oh, by the way, if you're 2 men, you cannot engage in sex because that doesn't qualify for our sexual morality. If so on and so forth. I would say that's not an objective standard. So you cannot come to an objective standard of what is sexual morality. All you could do is say, this is what we've decided it is, and we're stronger than you, so we're going to force you to agree to this particular standard. And I think that's really problematic if it's not the right standard, it turns out.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? I mean, the idea is that, well, if you're powerful, then you must have done something right. Everybody assumes that, even if you're, not very nice, you must have, you're a gangster or bandit, but you're successful. The assumption is that you must have done something right. And
Well, you've
I
done
guess at
something
the end of
to,
it,
yeah, you've done something to successfully meet your goal, but does that mean it's actually right? And again,
it
right and
depends
wrong
on how long you hold on to it, I guess. Because I
but
mean,
right,
you can be the most hateful person. You could be powerful temporarily, but you could be so bad that people gang up against you because you've hurt
yeah,
so many
people will,
people.
but we could look at any terrible thing that was successful and say, oh, well, at the time, it was the right thing to do because they were successful at it. So we can look at slavery. The slave owner, he could say, look, I'm successful. I'm owning other people. I've got lots of resources. I'm now getting more resources on the backs of their labor. I don't have to treat them like human beings because I don't have to. And we, by your definition, might makes right. And I think that's been what we have seen. I think I really like what you said. The proof is in the pudding. And I think if people stepped back to see what have these beliefs, these political beliefs and these religious beliefs actually produced, and it's produced wanton murder, it's produced othering, bigotry, so many other problems. That's literally what it's produced. And so we could maybe at some point say, you know what, this has been going on for thousands of years this way, and it's led to so much suffering. There's got to be a better standard. Instead of just continuing to recycle the same broken ideologies, actually step back and say, what is there a better standard? Because what we see is the world is becoming overpopulated. Wars are not stopping. We're still killing each other in our own streets as well as in other countries. We're looking at poverty all over the world. We're looking at world hunger. The pollution is a major problem that's going to affect the elites and the middle class and the poor alike. The climate change has no friends or enemies, right? It's literally something everyone's going to suffer universally. And we are seeing this global rise in temperature. We're seeing a massive reduction in clean water. We're seeing a reduction in food. And we just keep perpetuating the same problem as if, oh no, because God's going to make it right eventually, or God's going to come again and there's going to be this final battle between good and evil. And then there's going to be a new kingdom and a new heaven on earth and blah, 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 blah. And they just don't stop and say, wait a minute, this is not working. We got to come up with a better system. And that's the problem that I see, which is why Christianity is failing in the West, is because people have a
People
much
don't
more
believe in the
freedom.
Trinity.
Well,
I
people
mean,
have much more freedom here to actually question these beliefs. And
but it's not the religion of America anyway, is
no,
it?
it's
I mean,
not. It's not.
liberalism,
But it's
liberalism
really
is the
religion.
religion.
People say that America is a Christian nation, and it's not, because there isn't a organized collective religion. But it's undeniable that their significant majority of people that live in the West are Christians, because that's their origin story, right?
Hmm.
Because they come from Rome, and so ultimately, they've just adopted this Catholicism, and then of course they had the war of religion, the Protestants and the Catholics, and you've got, the line has been drawn in the sand, but they could all come together when it comes to something like, oh, we need to hate on the Muslims, or we need to hate on the Jews, or we hate the Hindus, or whatever it might be, because they're worse than my Catholic neighbor, because at least my Catholic neighbor and I believe in Jesus, or whatever it might be. So it's not a Christian nation, but there are a lot of Christians nonetheless.
But perhaps the problem is that America doesn't have an official religion. And I know that there's, well, the First Amendment says that there shall be no establishment of religion.
Right. Right.
But
And I
then
don't know,
it just
is
means
it a
that Congress
problem?
keeps making up the rules,
But is it a
and it's
problem?
not to the
Because
advantage
look at the countries that do have formal religion. Are they doing any better than anybody else in the world? No. The most successful countries are countries like Norway, for example, the most secular countries.
Norway? What makes you think it's successful?
Their recidivism rate. I don't know if you were there for my show I just did on Sunday, talking about the problem with the justice system, the criminal system, right? And I'm talking about mostly in America and the Western countries. And they have prisons basically have revolving doors on them. 77 to almost 80% of the criminals will reoffend and end up back in prison. So it tells you that this is highly unsuccessful. But you look at a country like Norway, and their recidivism rate is down at 20%. That is a massive difference, 20% to 80%. So you say, well, what are they doing right? Right. So looking at more secular nations, the happiness index, they always rank the highest. Right?
That's subjective too, isn't it?
When's the last time that Norway fired a missile at somebody, or had somebody drop a bomb on them? Right? Switzerland.
Well, because they're just a little country. They're just little insignificant European countries.
And yet they produce scientists, they produce doctors, they produce medical advancements, just like any other country.
Well, they give the Nobel Peace Prize to American presidents who start a war.
So well, that is quite perplexing. Yeah, that is quite perplexing, isn't it?
Yes. But I suppose I focus on America because it is the most powerful country in the world. And if there's something wrong with America, I would have thought the US voter would be able to do something about it.
Well, I think
You're the
they're
most
trying. You know, I think they're
proximate
trying.
group of people.
As frustrated as I am with American politics, I do think they're trying to fix these problems. I don't think that they're just like not looking for solutions. I think they are trying, but there's this big division because the solutions being proposed all come from a non-religious sector. The religious are really trying to hold on and double down with a clenched fist, white knuckling it, trying to say we need to maintain power. But what we're finding is this push to, abandon these religious beliefs. And so you're getting this massive schism between the religious and the irreligious. And the reason that other countries, like Muslim countries, are growing, Islam is growing so much faster than Christianity, is because you're not getting this push from within to abandon the religion, so to speak. I have some Muslim friends of mine that I engage with on a different social media platform, and they have told me that they would never admit to their parents or to their government that they are actually atheists. They claim to be Islamic, a Muslim, because they are afraid of the retribution that they will receive for outing themselves as being an atheist, but they actually don't believe in any of it. And that's keeps
What
this.
country are they from?
I'm talking about, in particular, this would be Muslims in Egypt have told me that. Muslims in Bangladesh have told me that. Muslims in India have told me that. Pakistan and Iran. And I know I've talked to Muslims all over the globe, but those are the countries that I have friends with that I speak frankly with, and they are willing to engage with me in those things. And I'm not going to out them. I don't want to give out names, addresses, but they're, and then you're not asking for that, obviously. But these are anecdotal stories. They're their own personal experiences, And it's not. I'm not trying to throw shade on Islam as being just the only religion that puts all this pressure on people, because it happens, as we talked about before. If you want to look at like the Mormons, for example, if you are raised as a Mormon and you leave that cult, which I believe all religions are cults, if you leave Mormonism, they are notorious for absolutely shunning you as a society, as a group, right? Like in Utah, when the Mormons were so prolific, and there's still a lot of Mormons in Utah, but when Brigham Young established this Mormon state, essentially is what Utah really was, right? It was a territory that was literally set up to provide an environment where the Mormons could exist away from the rest of the Protestants and the Catholics. And so now, as children becoming teenagers and becoming more educated, or starting to say, hey, I don't believe in this God belief, I either abandon religion or I adopt a different form of Christianity, they are completely shunned by their families. Like literally, parents will not talk to their children. Husbands leave their wives over this kind of stuff. It's insane how risky it can be to announce that you're no longer going to be a dutiful follower of a particular cult, right? It's very problematic.
If your wife converted to a different religion, wouldn't that present a problem to you?
It depends on what she does with it. For me personally, I respect my wife's autonomy, just like I respect everybody else's autonomy. She has the freedom to do whatever she wants with whomever she wants. Frankly, I don't own my wife. The beauty of our relationship is that we communicate honestly with each other, and we have mutual respect for each other, and we have self-respect. So I don't live in fear that my wife is going to go sleep around on me. However, I fully accept the fact that it's her right to do so as a human being, as a consenting adult. If she wants to go do whatever with another consenting adult, or if she wants to adopt a political belief that I don't hold, or if she wants to adopt a religious belief I don't hold, that's her right to do so. The question is, if it drives a wedge between our relationship, is what is she going to do with that belief? If she adopts a different religious belief or political belief and starts attempting to affect my freedom of well-being and my ability to make my own choices, well, then that will become problematic for a relationship. But if she could adopt whatever belief she wants, it's not going to affect us just because she carries a particular belief. This is why I'm not an anti-theist. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with being religious. I just think the problem is, what do religious people do with those beliefs? That's where I have the issue. If you're voting against gay marriage because you believe that it's a sin, I have a problem with that. If you just believe that gay marriage is a sin and you keep it to yourself and to tell that's your right to believe that, as far as I'm concerned.
What if she only eats kosher or halal? Would you have a problem with that?
She could eat whatever she wants as long as she doesn't tell me what I have to eat.
Hmm.
I mean, if I let's take veganism for example, right? Vegans are extremely emotional people, and I understand that they think they're reducing harm. But if she became a vegan and I'm eating bacon and eggs in the morning because for me it's a delicious treat, and she starts telling me, "Hey, you can't do that, or you shouldn't be doing that, or you're a murderer," or whatever the nonsense that vegans say, well then yeah, that's probably going to cause a rift in our relationship. But if she eats her vegetables, she wants to eat grass or whatever vegans are eating, and I'm eating bacon and eggs, and we love each other and respect each other, then her veganism is not an issue and my omnivore diet is not going to be an issue.
Right.
I just think it has to do with how we're treating each other. That's the most important thing. And I celebrate diversity. I think that having different beliefs is actually really important, because if everybody agreed on everything, when somebody adopts a really bad idea and the whole world shares this bad idea, well, that becomes a problem, right? And we don't know if our ideas are good or bad unless we have another idea to compare it to.
Of course. So we have all these different religions, which are, in a way, competing systems of morality, trying to tell us which system is probably the best if
Exactly.
it
And
were
that's
followed
why,
properly.
yes, and that is, and we can look at what, as you said before, the proof is in the pudding. We can look back because we have so much information on history. We can go back thousands of years and we could say these differences in these moral edicts have not solved any problems. We're actually in a much worse position overall as a species. We're still killing each other, we're still polluting the planet, so on and so forth. And so what can we adopt as a better system? And I think the acknowledgement that morality is objective gets us a lot closer to the goal, which is that we all want to live a good life. And so if we start, so for me, it's very fundamental, it's very basic and simple. It starts with a 3-part system, right? That's all interconnected. You have respect for the planet, because that's the environment we all live in. You don't want to shit in your own home, right? And you want to take care of the environment that you live in. The other thing is about respecting each other, and then having self-respect. And if you don't respect other people equally, then you cannot have self-respect, because you don't even know what respect is. And if you don't respect yourself, you don't know how to respect others. So all 3 of these things work together. If you can understand that 3-part system, then you can build up from there to understand virtue and objective morality. But you have to educate people in this. You have to get them to stop saying, God told me to do it, so I'm going to go ahead and destroy this other group of people. You have to say, no, there's an objective standard that requires freedom and well-being for every single person. The only people that we actively take away their freedom from are the criminals. And instead of just locking them up and throwing away the key, like we've been doing, which has been shown to be extremely unsuccessful, instead of chopping off their hands and their feet, which has been shown to be unsuccessful deterrent, because people are still stealing in countries where they chop off their hands and feet, so that's not stopping people. We need to actually focus on why are they doing these things? How can we help them to understand that this behavior leads to their own suffering? It's not just about the suffering of others, because we are very driven by ultimately what benefits us, what makes us feel good, what gives us the best life. So if we can help people to understand the way that you're going to live your best life is to get along with me, and the way that I'm going to live my best life is to give you the freedom to make your own choices, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So we need a degree of property rights and personal autonomy that is fair enough and
Fairness
has
is the key.
authority above humanity, in theory anyway. And
Fairness is very important, Claire. I'm sorry to cut you off here, but I want to really highlight this, because fairness is
I'm
where
only going to agree with you.
well, and the thing is that people don't even understand a basic concept of fairness. So, for example, I had this conversation with a group of people here a month or so ago, and the idea of fairness, the concept, went completely over every single person's head. I was astounded at the level of ignorance of an entire room full of people when I tried to explain to them that fairness means treating like cases alike, right? And that's where we can get justice from, is in fairness. A true justice means fairness. It means treating like cases alike. And so
Did they disagree with you?
Yes, they because their ignorance of what is a like case. That's where people get confused. So the analogy is, so they came up with an analogy, and they says, if a guy jumps over a fence, right, because he's gonna save a kid in a swimming pool, and another guy jumps over the same fence and he wants to go steal their TV and kick their dog, it's a like case because they're both jumping over the fence and trespassing on someone's property. That's the level of stupidity that we're dealing with in the world, Claire. I had to explain to them a number of times that this is not a like case just because they both jumped over the fence. There's a significant
Well,
difference.
motive is important.
It has everything to do with it. And they didn't understand that you have to look at all the big picture. A person who jumps over the fence to save a drowning child is a hero, and a person who jumps over the fence to steal a TV and kick the dog is a villain, right? Those are not like cases just because they jumped over the same stupid fence. People need to understand what fairness actually means, right?
What kind of people were they?
Christians and Jews and Muslims. I was the only skeptic, non-religious person in this panel of people. I couldn't believe what I was dealing with.
Shocking. Do you think people are getting stupider? Oh. He seems to have left. Oh, well. I guess we've been talking for a while. Well, I hope that was reasonably... Oh, he's back.
I've never had that happen to me before. I don't know if my StreamYard shut down there. That was very strange. Do I think people are getting stupider? I think is hilarious because it, on one hand, no, because of the advancements of science and technology. But on the other hand, it seems like we're just continuing to bang our head into the same wall, right? And expecting a different result, which just makes you wonder, how is this even possible? There are people, Claire, there are people who at least profess to believe that the earth is flat. Now, in 2026, how can anybody be that ignorant? It's astounding to me that there are still people. In fact, I actually refuse to believe that they're serious. I think they just want attention. How can somebody be so dumb to think the earth is flat? And yet there are people who proudly announce this.
I think they're trying to be clever and saying, prove the earth is round. You can't, can you?
And you can prove it 100 times over, and you could even show them simple experiments they can do themselves at their own home, and they refuse to engage.
I suppose that they're one of those people who, even when you give them proof after proof, they'll say, I don't accept that. I need more. So
yeah, you could lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I pity these people if they truly believe this. But I personally see the same thing with the religious groups and the political fanatics. I think that you could show them the evidence that this has not been successful overall, that when you say we are so powerful, we've taken charge of the system, and so it must work, they can't step back from the situation long enough to say that has been done hundreds of times over thousands of years, and every one of these civilizations collapses under its own weight. What are they doing wrong?
Not following the rules and not being able to agree on what the rules are. This is fundamentally the problem with, mortals saying, here's my system of rules, follow them, and then everybody will turn around and say, you and whose army are going to make me do this thing? So unless you have an army to make them do this thing, you won't be able to get them to do it.
But then we have the army, but then they get the army together and they make them do the thing. And then, as you pointed out so correctly, the army realizes that they're really the ones who are making it all happen because they've got the swords and the spears and the armor. And so they just take over and they tell Caesar, too bad. Now the Praetorian Guard is going to start calling the shots, right?
So there must be ways of persuading people to see reason in that, obviously some manifesto created by a mere mortal is not going to have as much as authority as an ancient book with people who've been around for yeah, over millennia, or maybe nearly two, or more than that. And that, I suppose, is a kind of irrefutable um, argument that simple minds can accept.
Well, I don't know, because I don't think that we've actually had that experiment run out yet. So we can't really say, because the significant majority of people still are religious. Right. I think last time I looked into some studies, is that 92 to 93% of the people all globally identify as being religious. Whereas I think it's safe to say that over 99% of the people had supernatural or superstitious beliefs at one point. That number is slowly dropping. But when 92% of the people still hold on to these irrational beliefs, then we haven't gotten to a point to where we can say, let's compare secularism to religion and see which is more successful. We haven't had that experiment yet. So it's impossible to say that religion is going to be more successful if we don't know, because we don't have a sample to even
I suppose
examine to make the claim.
well, the best way to conduct this experiment is really to put um, Muslims and Jews and whatever in neighboring territories and leave them alone for 100 years, but give them exactly the same resources and then
And
see
and
what they
and
make
you
of
would need to include a secular nation as well, an
it.
irreligious, and
And,
let
and,
them
and, and
have the same
yes,
resources, and then you would be able to actually have this comparison. And which is why I think that we should look at the most irreligious countries, the most secular countries like Switzerland or Norway, so on and so forth, and say, well, these countries have completely are not completely, but they are significantly more secular and are literally pressing to abandon theology and focus on sciences. And we find that they are extremely successful. Nobody's warring with them. People are happy to trade with them and to do global economic commerce with them. Their people rate the highest on the happiness index. They have long lifespans. Their children are the most successful. They put the most resources into themselves and don't, mongle with other countries other than to trade goods and services.
so you're saying the happiest countries outside America is Sweden and Switzerland. Is that your
That's my
considered opinion?
understanding. Is countries, the most secular countries rate the highest on the happiness index. Now, the happiness index, I will admit, is kind of a, how do we even,
Subjective.
yeah, how do we even put that together, right? Because for one thing, it's all about self-reporting. And as we
Mm.
talked about
And
before,
samples.
if you live in a country where there's a tremendous amount of pressure to be a Trinitarian Christian, or a state, let's say, whatever it is, and of course, you're likely to say that, yes, you're not only a Trinitarian, but you love the Trinity and you love being a Trinitarian because the pressure is on, right? So it's difficult to say how much the happiness index actually matters, but it is an indicator that you can at least look at to say, well, we don't have anything else to look at. So what else can we look at? We can look at economic viability, the GDP. We could look at health, as far as public health, public safety, crime rates, recidivism rates, so on and so forth. We could look at some other statistics that might feed into this happiness, hunger, poverty, homelessness, stuff like that. And what we find is hunger, poverty, and homelessness rate very high in religious countries. Crime rates are very high in religious countries, which you would think that if there was this objective moral standard, crime would be very low, if not non-existent altogether. But it seems that,
Which religious country has the highest crime rate?
oh, I wouldn't say without looking up the statistics, but I know that America is very high in crime. I know that Iran and some Muslim countries are very high in crime. I know that I think Israel is not super high in crime, but they're higher than like Buddhist nations, for example. Some of the Buddhist nations are some of the lowest when it comes to religious countries. And again, is there such a thing as a Buddhist country? No, there's not. And we can't even say that America is a Christian nation, right? So again, it's really difficult to have an objective standard to look at and make these polls, put these polls together.
Mm.
But I
So
think,
I guess
hypothetically, if we could do, like you said, if we had 4 territories that all had equal resources, right, and gave them an equal opportunity to exist uninterfered with, if we had your 3 Abrahamic religions, In fact, I think we could do all 5 of the religions, right? The top 5: Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And
Plus
then we
the
have
atheist.
a secular nation. So we have 6 total. Give them all equal territories, all equal resources. Say there's no war between other countries, but you can fight amongst yourselves all you want. And what will happen is the Christians will fight among the Christians, the Muslims, the Shiites, and the Sunnis will fight amongst the Shiites and Sunnis. The Orthodox Jews will fight against the rabbinical Jews, and the Buddhists, the Theravada Buddhists, will fight against the Mahayana Buddhists, and so on and so forth. And the secular people will just kill each other over politics, probably.
Which is a kind of religious war for
It
atheists.
is. It is. Right. Exactly.
Well, I suppose we can imagine what it would be like. I suppose the problem for the atheists is that they won't have enough as many children as the other lot, and might lose a war against the other lot, the religious people who have more children, and fulfill the prophecy of demographics as destiny.
I'm just looking at some of the comments here. I forgot that I could actually do that. I had a different window open, but yeah, there are some interesting comments here.
Did you want to address them?
I'm just kind of looking through here to see if there's anything that's more of just a passing comment or something that. Yeah, I agree with Seeking Genuine here. I enjoy the integration of philosophy in this conversation. I think that's where we're going to ultimately find the truth is looking more philosophically at these questions, because as I mentioned before, truth can only be discovered in one of 2 ways, which is the empirical method, which is what we base science on, and in philosophy. If the person who can come up with the valid argument that leads to the sound conclusion, we should follow that argument unless we have evidence against it, or another argument that leads to a sound conclusion that refutes it. So philosophy is extremely important. I like what Plato said about the philosopher king, right? I think there's a lot to be said for that. And he was, he lived over 2,000 years ago. And so I think, yeah, well over 2,000 years ago. So I just think that, philosophy actually has a great deal of value in this conversation, because what's been happening has only been successful for a period of time. And so we can see that it's not going to lead us to ultimate success unless we think that it's impossible to have some kind of an eternal system, that it's always going to fall at some point. It's just destined to do so, at which point we might as well just throw in the towel and, push the red button. Just, do like the ethalists and the antinatalists want to do and just stop procreating, right? If we can't fix it, why continue to just proliferate the suffering? But I think we can fix it. I think there is a solution. I just think that it needs to be implemented. It needs to be understood and then implemented. And I think that with the Enlightenment, we're starting to see that secularism is actually the best way to get this successful system, because when people could sit down and pick apart the political view or pick apart the religion and point out all the fallacies and all the lack of evidence or the evidence against it, suddenly it demotivates people. I don't know if demotivates is actually even a word, but it encourages people to abandon the belief.
Well, the thing between, I suppose, traditional societies and atheists is that the birth rate is significantly higher in traditional societies than atheist secular societies, and
Yeah,
this will
Khalid.
be, you might say it doesn't matter, but I guess eventually it does.
No, I think it does matter, right? But the problem is that Khalid and I had this conversation, and we have a completely opposite view. Khalid is under the impression that a high birth rate is a good thing, and I'm under the impression that a high birth rate is actually a very bad thing right now. The population, the global population, is growing at such a rate that the globe itself cannot sustain the people. We are literally stacking each other on top of each other because the usable territory to expand outward has already been soaked up by everybody. And we're just popping out all these kids is creating more of a problem and future problems, but it's a self-perpetuating situation. So in countries that have a below replacement rate, like in Japan, for example, they're panicking because they say we're below replacement rate, right? What does that mean for the future of the country? Because we
It
cannot
means
sustain,
mass immigration, I
right,
suppose.
exactly, because they cannot sustain the infrastructure. But what happens is you have a bigger infrastructure because you have more people. So you need more people to sustain that infrastructure. Well, then the infrastructure grows, you need more people, and it just continuously perpetuates itself because the infrastructures are trying to grow at an exponential or at a consistent rate, right? And they want to keep growing and growing and growing, but you cannot grow forever. That's which is why all economic systems and all political systems collapse at some point because you cannot keep growing. So you have to collapse your own system if the global economy doesn't do it for you. And then you get to start all over and then you build it back up until it cannot sustain itself. And then you have to crash the stock market or the housing market or so on and so forth. Or you got to go start a war with somebody to infuse the economy. It's a real problem.
Well, yes. So we would like, more stable societies, and that means a stable birth rate that doesn't, suddenly double or suddenly halve, because that will, create all kinds of structural problems. But it's easier said than done. People used to think that, a stable, sustainable birth rate is, two. But maybe you need a spare. And nobody has really quite worked it out yet. And obviously, even having children is not enough if, that they are not as good as their parents, or, they don't become productive citizens and become criminals instead. So that's why, the practice of marriage it used to be so rigorously enforced in social expectations and pressure. But and as I keep saying, marriage was probably the thing that religions are meant to support, and obviously, if that's a baseline, if that's the least your religion can do for you, and Christianity is not doing it, then maybe it's time to do something, try something else. If you want to have some kind of stability. And before I forget, I just want to point out that in India, it seems, the Hindu birth rate is below that of the Muslim birth rate. So they're both traditional societies, but
India,
the Hindu
India cannot sustain its own people. India has, I think, the most polluted water and in any other modern country. Their pollution rate in India is out of control. They are so overpopulated in India, so they cannot continue to have large families. They've got nowhere to put them and no way to sustain them with clean water.
Well, they seem to move abroad anyway, and China is having a lower birth rate than India. We don't know what this means. It just seems to me that if you get wealthy, you will have fewer children. It almost seems, built in that.
Yeah,
once
that I
you
talked
do
to
quite
I
well.
talked to Clete about that very thing, and he asked me, what I thought about that, and my feeling is the wealthy people tend to be the more educated people. And the more educated people are able to look at the situation and say, wow, having 5 or 6 children is not a good idea because of the overpopulation problems that I talked about. Whereas the poor people who are too stupid to even make a success of their own lives and too incapable, they're having 6, 7, 8, 9 children because they don't know any better. They don't see the future. They can look at the map and they don't know where they're going. And that is a huge problem. And it's, I think, why more educated people are having smaller families. I think the less educated people, the one who are easily duped into thinking that, having lots of children is actually a virtuous thing, which is a concept you get from religion, is exactly the opposite of what the virtue is, because you're not respecting the environment and you're literally you are birthing the mouths that will take food away from you at such a rate that it's damaging your own ability to live a good life. You can't sustain yourself. Why are you having any children, frankly, if you can't sustain yourself? That just makes no sense.
But I guess in the olden days, people had large families in order to make sure that, that there's enough of a labor force, enough people to do stuff, and also to make sure that the average age is lower rather than higher, and because this would have an effect on the character of your country. I
They
mean, you can
needed to have the
imagine
large
if
yeah, they needed these large families to sustain these infrastructures, as I mentioned before, but then the infrastructure has to grow to accommodate the more people. Well, then the larger infrastructure requires even more people to sustain it. And it just goes on and on and on and on. There's people have to that's why human beings, there's a lot of movies that talk about this, and and even in philosophy they talk about this, more pessimistic philosophers, that is, that human beings are a type of a virus on the planet because we terraform the environment and we don't live symbiotically with nature. And that's very true. We can be literally equivocated to a virus, which is really something that we should all consider as being shameful. We should be ashamed of ourselves that with our being the most advanced animal mentally, and with our ability to be bipedal and have opposable thumbs, and we can build supercomputers and jet airplanes and cruise ships on the water, we are destroying the very planet that we need for our own survival. It's staggering how ignorant we can be while being so capable at the same time.
Well, time will tell, I suppose. Um, well, thank you. Do you have any last words about the nature and purpose of religion? It sounds like atheism is a form of religion that promotes values of antinatalism. Which
Yeah, well, atheism is simply a proposition on one single question. Secularism itself can be more of a religion. I don't know that atheism is necessarily. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, you can if people combine on a certain thought, it brings them together, then it can be considered a religion. But atheism doesn't actually promote a value system. That's separate from atheism. That's where you get into more of secularism. That's, and are secularists atheists? Yes, but it's not the values that you get from atheism. It's the values they get from their secular beliefs.
Well, I suppose you could say that secular people tend to have fewer children and are more sexually liberated than those coming from traditional societies, and with all the consequences that would entail. And I guess that's the maybe we can both agree that's a real difference. Whether it's good or bad is something time will tell, I suppose.
Well, I think closing, common ground, because I always like to find common ground with people I talk to. One, I would like to say thank you for hosting this conversation. It's always nice to talk to you, Claire. And I would say for common ground, I think that even though you and I might disagree on sexual morality and so on and so forth, I think that you and I would both agree that having two parents in the household is far more beneficial for the children than just single parent or no parent households. And so I don't think two parents need to be biological parents. I don't think they need to be opposite sex. I just think there need to be two functional adults. You might say it needs to be a man and a woman and the biological parents. So we might have a disagreement there, but I think we can both agree that two parents in the household is the best way to raise a child. And I think we could both agree that if people don't have the resources to provide themselves a good life, they have no business having any children whatsoever.
I think we can agree on that.
I love to close on a positive note. And I thank you so much for hosting. Is there anything, other questions you had for me, or should I just wish you a good day at this point? And to your audience, I hope you all have a good day and, find happiness out there. Peace and happiness for everybody, right?
Yes. Yes.
All right,
I think all right. Thank you. Take care.
Absolutely.
Bye.